was sitting in the Hilton Hotel where they'd made all the Thunderbird craft in ice, and I was with an executive from the American company that had co-produced it with Lou, and he was swirling his scotch around in a glass and thinking, and he said, "You know, Gerry, I can't make up my mind whether this is going to take as much money as Bond or more."
Dad and his colleague Arthur Provis had set up AP Films to make puppet shows, and at the time the puppet shows were kind of Muffin the Mule, Andy Pandy, very basic kind of twee puppet shows.
I saw myself that I was going to be something like a Steven Spielberg of that time, and here I was being asked to make puppet films, but we needed the money, so we took it on.
Dad was not happy with that, and he worked and worked to improve the techniques they were using and to go from very basic puppet shows to exciting, extravagant shows filled with special effects. And alongside this, they were also developing merchandise lines and turning it really into quite an empire. So at the time, they were making Stingray, which was the first colour children's show in the UK. They were really kind of at the pinnacle of kids' TV, but even that was nothing compared to what was about to happen when they started to make Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds! Thunderbirds are go!
So as Stingray's production was coming to a close, Lou Grade, who was the man who financed all of the AP Films and Century 21 shows, wanted to know, what's the next show, Gerry?
I had the inevitable call from Lou to say, "Can you come up tomorrow morning? I want to hear what you've got in line for me for the next show."
In the meantime, there had been a great mine disaster in Germany, and a lot of miners were trapped underground, trapped by floodwater.
And of course it was a very moving story. Many of the men died, naturally.
It's something that really captured Dad's imagination. He was absolutely fascinated by it and glued to the radio.
The thing that did it for me was they've located the miners, they're trapped under there, and the only way we can get them out is to drill a big borehole. But the only machine capable of it is 8 hours away.
And that was the story that inspired Thunderbirds.
And so we embarked on the most difficult and most costly series I've ever made.
Thunderbirds are go!
The basic premise of Thunderbirds was an international rescue organisation headed by millionaire ex-astronaut Jeff Tracy.
Unless we can get the crew and passengers out before that aircraft hits the ground, they are all doomed men.
They had a fleet of 5 fantastic vehicles. Each was piloted by one of Jeff's 5 sons, Scott, Virgil, Alan, Gordon and John.
I decided that it made sense that the whole thing would be cloaked in secrecy. Hence, it was that the base was set on an island in the Pacific.
The craft were developed and built by Brains, their chief scientist, and then back in London, away from Tracy Island, Special Agent Lady Penelope was running the UK operation. She was ably assisted by her ex-con chauffeur, Parker.
Of course, the launching of the various machines, you know, the pool that slid back, the palm trees which swung out to allow Thunderbird 2, which came out from a hangar inside a rock. Thunderbird 3 came up and went through a circular house. So it all clicked together to make a really super duper show. And it was the one show of all the shows I've made that I was really proud of.
Well, Father, takeoff is scheduled for tomorrow morning.
You'll have to make a decision soon, Dad.
Even if it's no.
This is a tough one. I know how you boys feel. I guess you're raring to go. But as you know, we have a strict rule here. No international rescue craft is launched unless someone is in grave danger. Right?
Right. Guess so, Dad.
That's the way it's always been.
Guess you're right, Dad.
Yeah. However, rules were made to be broken.
You might think from seeing Thunderbirds that the operation behind it was a glamorous one, but in fact it was in one of the least glamorous places in the UK, in a workshop in Slough.
We worked all the hours that God made. I mean, we had a wonderful unit. We were all pioneers.
And by the time we'd reached Thunderbirds, the AP Films team was pretty large, probably around a couple of 100 people, consisting of everyone from set designers, production artists, puppeteers, puppet makers, costume makers, and of course the team that were filming and editing.
It was a very exciting show to make. We were able to do everything just as well as it was possible to make.
It was a huge operation, but as they'd gone along, they'd really kind of become a really close-knit family unit.
We used to shoot until 12 o'clock at night and start early the next morning.
And there was a real family feel behind the productions, and I think that really shone through. Relatively speaking, the puppets at the time of Stingray and coming into Thunderbirds were way more advanced than anything that had come before. If you look at children's TV puppetry around the time of those other shows made by other studios, you quite often had fairly ugly, rudimentary puppets with painted on eyes and mouths. They really looked like static objects being dangled from the end of strings, and that was something that Dad was desperate to move away from.
Well, I couldn't see how I could possibly make a television series like that.
So what he ended up doing was really taking the first steps into making these marionettes into animatronics, I suppose.
Captain Paul Travers.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Lady Penelope Crichton Ward, representing the Universal Mirror. First question. Tell me, what do you find most frightening? Your deal at this press conference or your flight tomorrow in 0X?
Well, without question, this press conference, ma'am.
The early puppets couldn't open their mouths. We moved on to mouths that could open, and in order to make them open, we pulled a particular control wire, and the mouth opens. But now the mouth would stay open, so we fitted a return spring so that as they released the pressure on the control wire, the mouth was shut. The problem was that in order to open and shut the mouth, that string or control wire had to be tugged like this, and consequently the puppet's head was talking like this the whole time.
I don't like the sound of it, Dad. We've got to do something about this.
Yeah, but what?
I decided the only thing to do was in some way to make the mouths operate automatically.
Things like the lip sync, which allowed electrical currents to be passed into the puppet's head, which would cause the mouth to open and shut in time with the dialogue, were really a first in terms of what AP Films were doing versus the rest of the world.
I came up with the idea of putting the puppeteers overhead.
Innovations like the working of the puppets from a gantry over the top of the set, rather than over the top of a backer board at the very back of the set, really started to change the way they shot the pictures.
That was the first step that we took towards making, in my opinion, the puppet film respectable.
All of the scenes were really treated as if the puppets were live actors. Everything about it meant that they were making more dynamic puppet films than ever before.
Now this is a tough assignment, and if this mission is successful, you will be the first men to land on Mars. This project has been the most costly yet devised by man. However, the safety of the crew and passengers still takes top priority.
At the time, Thunderbirds was the most expensive TV show made in the UK. And Lou Grade, who was the man putting the money up, was desperate to break America and to sell the shows to the American networks.
At the time, if you put all the sales together and added up the figure, America would pay a much larger figure than the whole world put together. So the American market was very, very important, and it was very important to me because our shows were very expensive, and I was a perfectionist, and therefore they became more and more expensive. The saving grace was, but the industry went through a period of having transatlantic accents, which I hated. We hated them over here, the Americans hated them over there. They just weren't a very good idea. But since we were making science fiction films about submarines that could go down to enormous depths, rockets, that would be fired into space. It didn't make sense for us to try to claim that we in England were doing that. Can you imagine a broadcaster saying, there's great excitement in this country at the moment because the first rocket going to the moon is being launched in Scunthorpe tonight? Now, you know, it would have been laughable. So we were able to use American characters in order to make the stories believable, but at the same time, it also suited our book. Having had a whole bunch of American characters, I thought we ought to have at least 2 English characters, and I came up with the idea of Penelope and Parker.
Thunderbirds was so geared towards an American audience, in fact, that even the 2 British characters are the stereotypes that an American audience would expect. So you've got the upper class posh lady and the working class Cockney butler.
Reason being, I felt, was that they could play a serious role, but they'd be heavily laced with comedy. And I knew that we British have the capability of laughing at ourselves, and the Americans love to laugh at us. So it worked very well.
I don't think there's much point in looking for survivors, Parker.
No, m'lady.
The character of Parker, I saw the clay sculpt, and it was such a wonderful head. I thought, God, we've got to have a marvellous voice for this. And 2 or 3 of us used to go down to a pub in Crookham-on-Thames. They had a nice English little restaurant there, and they had a wine waiter called Arthur. And he was a snob who dropped his H's and then put them back in the wrong place.
And now, by the courtesy of the New World Aircraft Corporation, we bring you the Drinking Half Hour.
I sent David Graham, who played the voice of Parker, down to have lunch every day of 1 week, and we picked up the tab. And after lunch, he used to chat to Arthur, and he picked up this patter, and that's how he copied it, and that's how Parker got his voice.
Stone the crows.
Parker was a smash hit overnight, and then, of course, we said, now what are we going to do about Arthur? Were you going to tell him? It was obviously, he was a man who was a Cockney, but had pulled himself up by his shoelaces, and would he be proud or would he be offended? We decided he would be offended. We didn't tell him, and he went to his grave never knowing that the character was based on him.
Thunderbird 1, ready to go.
Okay, Scott. Clear to go. Good luck.
Thanks, Father.
Thunderbirds TV series was originally intended to be half-hour episodes, and they'd already completed 9 episodes by the time that Dad took the first episode to Lou Grade.
And we went upstairs into his private preview theatre, and we sat side by side. He remained silent, didn't say a word, and then the lights, end title music, lights came up, and he was silent for a moment. And my heart was thumping because I'd spent a fortune on this thing. And he walked all the way down the theatre to the screen. And then he turned round to face me and he said, "Gerry, this is not a television series." I thought the ground had opened up and I was going to be swallowed up. I was absolutely distraught. And then he walked all the way back and he wagged his finger right in front of my face and said, "Gerry, I'm telling you, this is not a television series." He then said, "Gerry, this is a feature film."
Lou Grade loved it so much and saw so much potential that he instantly upped the budget and asked the AP Films team to turn the series from half-hour episodes to hour episodes.
I said, "But we shot 9 pictures as a half hour." He said, "I don't care, you'll have to make them as 1 hour."
Which meant unpicking those first 9 and refilming sections and reconstructing them. But before the first episode was even transmitted, Lou had had so much faith that he'd already done a deal with United Artists to make the Thunderbirds feature film, Thunderbirds Are Go.
Excitement is gold. Adventure is gold. Danger is gold. Thunderbirds are gold. Now, on the big screen, in Technicolor and Technoscope, Thunderbirds are gold.
During the time that the AP Films team had made their different puppet shows, they'd really honed their craft and developed some industry-specific skills that weren't seen anywhere else. So by the time it came to making the films, they saw this as a big opportunity to step up and go to a whole new level.
Now, Scott! Now!
It was very well made, and I thought it was a great picture, and so did everybody else.
The Thunderbirds TV series was such a huge success in the UK. It was loved by the public, the critics, and especially by Lou Grade, that by the time Thunderbirds Are Go came up to its premiere, expectations were high that the film was going to be a huge success.
The show went very, very well, but of course we had mainly our own staff there, so of course they all loved it and cheered. I was sitting in the Hilton Hotel where they'd made all the Thunderbird craft in ice, and I was with an executive from the American company that had co-produced it with Lou, and he was swirling his scotch around in a glass and thinking, and he said, "You know, Gerry, I can't make up my mind whether this is going to take as much money as Bond or more."
Mind the gap, my lady, when you step into the car.
Thank you, Parker. We don't want to fall back to earth, do we? Mind the gap, Alan. Mind the gap, Alan. Mind the gap.
The following day, Sylvia and I went on tour to promote the film, and it was just a terrible time because our marriage was breaking up, and it was a very difficult time, and it was even more difficult because when the show was over and we left the theatre, the manager, I said, "Well, good night, sleep well." And he said, "You're joking." He said, "I'll be up all night." He said, "They'll be queuing up 5 o'clock tomorrow morning to see this." Well, they didn't queue up. In fact, the theatres were empty. And the only thing that we could think was at that time, the audience was not used to seeing a feature film version of a television show. So people would look and see Thunderbirds and they say, "Well, we've seen it on television."
Unfortunately, the film just wasn't the success it was expected to be. And I guess it could be down to any number of reasons. It was one of the first times that a TV series had been then made into a film and gone to the cinema, and perhaps the public just weren't ready to see a TV series put into the cinema. Maybe their attitude was, well, we can see it at home, what's the point? But also, I think it was a bit of a challenge for the team at AP Films to go from this very successful formula that they'd come up with for the TV series, and then to adapt that for a big screen. I just think maybe they couldn't see what the magic parts of the formula were, and maybe that meant that the real magic was lost by the time it got into the cinema.
I went to see Lou and I thought he was going to say, "Let's go on with Thunderbirds," but he said, "I want a new show." And I appealed and he said, "Gerry, It's easier for me to sell a new show than more Thunderbirds. So yes, we missed an opportunity there.
Despite the relative failure of Thunderbirds Our Go, the AP Films team was so conscious of what a fantastic success the TV series had been that they pushed ahead and made a second film, Thunderbirds 6.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, International Rescue's latest top secret, Thunderbirds 6.
Thunderbirds 6 became a very different film from Thunderbirds Our Go. It was a lot lighter, and some of the comedy was re-injected that had been present in the TV series. Technically, again, it was a fantastic film, but unfortunately by the time it was released in 1968, Thunderbirds, the TV series, had been off air for so long that it had somehow dropped out of the public consciousness. And so despite being probably a better film, Thunderbirds 6 just didn't enjoy the success that the AP Films team were hoping for.
It does better today than it did at the time.
I think it's a testament to the quality of the shows and their longevity that 25, 40 years on, even now, the shows and the films are enjoyed by multiple generations, and I think that's a testament to the quality, the creativity and the artistry that went in to make them, and reflects the love and passion of the teams that put them together.